Joe Bowser here from Roth Jackson, where I lead our TCPA compliance and class action defense group. Today's video, we're going to focus on the right tools to look for in a TCPA compliant dialer solution. In the category of don't bring a knife to a gunfight, when you're looking for a dialer solution, you obviously want to make sure that they have the core tools that you need to meet your TCPA and state mini TCPA compliance objectives. So, first things first, let's talk about the dialer features you're going to want to consider. So under the TCPA, there are two core sets of rules. On the one hand, you have 227B, which regulates auto dialer, pre-recorded, and artificial voice calls. And then the second set of rules deals with the do not call list rules. So we're going to deal with those separately. Back in April of 21, the Supreme Court issued a case called Facebook versus DeGuide, where it held that under Congress's language defining what is an automatic telephone dialing system, aka an auto dialer, it's quite narrow. The system needs to be capable of automatically or sequentially generating the phone numbers that'll be called or stored. And Readymode system doesn't do that, and you'll probably find others that have since figured out how to get that code out of their platform, if it was there to begin with. So, the first thing you want to make sure you're doing is not using a system that could qualify as an auto dialer under federal law. But separately, some states, either before or after Facebook, have defined their mini TCPA, their state TCPA laws, more broadly to basically define an auto dialer as anything that's capable of dialing from a list. So pre-Facebook, and even with some of those state laws, like you'll find in Florida, for example, you need to look for a dialer that has a manual dial mode, much like one would dial from their phone. So if you don't have consent to make auto dialer calls, you need to make sure that you're not using an auto dialer if you're calling into those states that have an expansive definition of auto dialer. So tools like Readymode can give you the predictive dialer mode and a manual dialer mode so that you can meet the needs of the campaign at hand and segregate those calls so that you're using the right tool for the right job. I mentioned pre-recorded voice. The TCPA and many state laws also cover pre-recorded calls. So you're going to want to make sure that you segregate your lists to make the calls that require the type of consent that you need to make pre-recorded calls. Under the federal TCPA, if you're going to make pre-recorded sales calls, you need prior express written consent, except now in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is Texas and some other Gulf states. But because you don't know where anybody is, even though you know their phone number, the cautious approach, of course, is to make sure that you do have prior express written consent for all of the pre-recorded calls that you make. So too with AI or artificial voice or soundboard, all of those calls fall under the same bucket of pre-recorded or artificial voice calls under the TCPA. And the Readymode platform can help you segregate the types of calls that you're making so that you're very clearly only making those calls with the requisite level of consent, provided that you have it. And you can segregate your live agent traffic from your pre-recorded call traffic and keep clean delineations of who's getting which type of calls. So those are the core TCPA issues. If you're focused on the 227B section of the Act, and then with respect to the state mini TCPAs, again, there are places where if you don't have the right level of consent to make auto-dialed calls under the expansive state definition, you can use manual dialing modes on the platform. So those are the 227B issues, and then the state mini TCPA auto dialer issues that you want to be mindful of when you're shopping for your dialer tools. The second set of rules that I mentioned are the DNC or do not call list rules. And there are a number of considerations that you want to look out for there. So chief among them, you want to make sure that you either have what the DNC rules call prior express invitation or permission, or an established business relationship. So prior express invitation or permission is essentially like a form of consent, a form of written consent ideally. And then established business relationships can take a number of forms. if a consumer walks into the store and makes it what the law calls an inquiry, right? If they inquire of your services, whether you go in to say, hey, I'd like to test drive this car, or when is this product available, etc., or they call you and ask about a service offering, a product offering, that is an inquiry. You can call them back, notwithstanding their telephone number being on the National Do Not Call Registry, for a period of 90 days, unless they make an earlier internal do not call request, and we'll get to that in a second. So you can get an inquiry that's good for 90 days, but if they do make a transaction, you have a transactional EBR that's good for the life of the transaction plus 18 months, unless they, again, make an earlier internal do not call request. Readymode allows you to notate internal do not call requests during the call, after the call, and it dispositions the call appropriately so that it suppresses further calls out to that number. And it makes it easy to export the internal do not call requests so that if you have other vendors or you're using other platforms to make other forms of TCPA implicating communications, such as SMS or things like that, you can easily cross-pollinate and cross-suppress your internal do not call lists across platforms, which is an expectation under the federal rules, certainly, and a variety of state laws as well. So if you're using multiple platforms, you want to make sure that you have easy ways to cross-pollinate your internal do not call requests to make sure that those suppression lists are being applied to your calling and SMS lists writ large. So another DNC rule that's often overlooked are the time of day restrictions. The federal rules prohibit making unsolicited sales calls, so-called telephone solicitations, after 9 p.m. and before 8 a.m. So those are the so-called quiet hours rules that have been in place since 1992. Consumers can sue about those violations. The TCPA created that rule in 92, and therefore it is connected to the 227C1 rules that the FCC created in 92, and for which Congress did create what's called a private right of action or a right to sue. So you want to make sure that you're not making unsolicited sales calls after 9 p.m. Or before 8 a.m. for the federal rules, but a variety of states have different restrictions on those times of day. Some of them have Saturday restrictions. Some of them have Sunday restrictions. At least 5 states have emergency restrictions. Louisiana is regularly declaring states of emergency, and those states of emergency tie to their time of day restrictions. So it would be unlawful to make an unsolicited sales call into Louisiana during a state of emergency, for example. And you want a dialer that gives you the opportunity to suppress calls during those time periods and helps you stay on track of those. And Readymode has some default features that you can enable if you're making those kinds of calls. So to recap, you want to look for a dialer that's helping you use the right tool for the right job. If you're making unsolicited sales calls, you're going to need to think about things like your do not call registry scrubbing, right? And so Readymode has integrations with multiple vendors like DNC.com that allow you to use your SAN, your subscription account number from the FTC, and automatically incorporate the DNC.com scrubbing tool against your list to make sure that you are not calling numbers that are on the National Do Not Call Registry with unsolicited sales calls. If you have consent or an EBR, obviously those rules wouldn't apply, but you're going to want to make sure that those consents remain good. And those integrations with the third-party vendors can include using the reassigned number database, which is the tool that callers can use to make sure that the number that the consumer gave you when they gave you consent remains their number. The reassigned number database is the FCC established database wherein carriers report the numbers that are permanently disconnected, and then every month you're allowed to then tell the reassigned number database, I got consent from this phone number on such and such day. Has it been reassigned or disconnected rather since then? And it will respond with a yes or a no. And if it hasn't been disconnected, that is the federal regime's way of giving you a safe harbor to make calls, continued calls to that number, even though they gave you consent months or perhaps a year ago. So those third-party integrations are important features of a compliant dialing regime, and you can get those through Readymode's third-party integrations, and obviously the in-house internal do not call registration and disposition features are certainly important facets of that, particularly so that you can suppress further calls from the Readymode platform and cross-check those against any other tools that you're using for your customer outreach and campaigns. So to recap, the 227B and 227C features that you want to consider include making sure that you're logging the internal do not call requests, using the do not call registry and reassign number database scrubbing tools that are applicable to your campaigns if you're making those types of sales calls that are subject to the D&C rules and state D&C rules. And those are the core features to think about and maintain as you keep a TCPA compliant regime. Again, Joe Bowser from Roth Jackson here with another Readymode video for your TCPA compliant objectives. See you next time.